So, yeah, Steve Wozniak started the old Apple with Steve Jobs.
Ooh.
And in this book, he talks about the creation of the chip.
What's that?
Oh, no. Yeah.
Oh, no.
The microchip, I would say.
What's that?
The microchip. And how it's changed the world.
Yeah.
Yes.
Probably the most amazing invention that has changed the world more than I think anything else.
What would that be?
The microchip.
What's that?
What's that?
I brought a little excerpt from his book.
Thank you.
I brought an excerpt from his book.
You
'Cause I
did?
think it's very fascinating.
Good.
Yes.
Experts are important to hear them talk.
No, excerpt.
You're saying it wrong, stupid. Cocksucker. Fuck you for Christmas.
Chip Voss.
What's that?
The beauty is, you can read books. I read books, and then you go, wow, that was fascinating. Now I go find the audio book. We do a radio show. Now I could bring the part of the fucking book in.
Book on tape?
To play for everybody.
Whatever they call it these days.
Yes.
My mother slapped me in the face one time for reading. She goes, "What are you, uppity? All of a sudden you missed the big pants?"
So I brought in this little part of the book, Steve Wozniak, talking about the microchip.
What's that?
That changed how we all live.
He was talking about what?
Don't get him going. We all know what it is.
Yes.
It's the micro
wafer.
Micro wafer. Exactly. Here's Steve Wozniak.
Chips.
What's that?
Chips.
What's that?
Chips. I never had the courage to ask Chips.
What's that?
Steve Jobs. Free chips.
What's that?
Chip company.
What?
Very few chips.
What's that?
20 chips.
What's that?
Which is very, very few chips.
What's that?
Chips I had
That's
with
right.
few chips.
Yeah, what's that?
Ram chips.
No,
with
what's that?
Ram chips.
What's that?
8 chips.
What's that?
Used the chips,
What's that?
including chips.
What's that?
Chips.
What's that? What's that?
Chips on.
What's that?
The chips.
What's that?
Chips.
What's that?
Chips. Their
What's that?
chips went bad to those chips.
Oh, what's that?
Registers, chips,
What's that?
dates, chips that were
What's
coming
that?
up. Small
Yeah,
chip.
what's
a
that?
couple of chips inside.
What's that?
Your chips could
What's that?
really do only one thing.
They do,
If
right?
chips
What's
were
that?
simpler inside a chip.
What's that?
If I could use chips,
What's
the
that?
amount of chips, a few chips
What's that?
together, and use a crystal clock chip.
What's that?
28 chips for the
What's that?
Pong design.
Wow,
I
that's
programmed
amazing.
These
I
little
never knew
chips,
that. What's that?
The fewest possible chips.
What's that?
Higher and higher
Oh,
in
what's
chip
that?
count.
What's that?
Approaching 200 chips.
What's that?
Thousands of little chips.
Oh, what's that?
Wire chips together. Steve would wire the chips together.
What's that?
Connecting chips
Oh,
with
what's that?
wires, chips,
Wires,
and
chip-
everything.
what's a chip?
Took a
What's-
normal digital chip.
What's that?
A chip that
What's
works
that?
with ones and zeros,
What's that?
not waves. And you spun this chip
Oh, what's
around
that?
with one little digital
That's pretty-
chip. The
what's
whole
that?
thing used 45
How did you
chips.
do that? What's that?
They were paying us
That's
based
really
on how
good.
few
These guys are
chips
very-
I
what's
could
that?
do it in.
Really
Talking
brilliant
about
to put that kind of stuff
microprocessor
together
chips.
because that was
Only
that.
now all the CPU
I don't know how they're
parts were
doing
on
it.
one chip
What's that?
instead of a bunch of chips.
What's
like
that?
memory
I don't know
chips.
how they're doing
A
this.
CPU
Really
on
driving
one
me crazy.
chip.
What's that?
And mine had a
This is such a
CPU that was
knowledgeable
on
group of
several
people
chips.
to put that-
Or another
all
processor
this stuff
like it.
together.
And some
I never
memory
could have done.
chips,
What's that?
Which
I
really
never
was
could have
just
done
a
something
glorified
like that.
bunch
It's
of
really
chips
difficult. What's that?
with just a
It's
few
really
chips.
difficult
And a
that-
couple of
to be
other
this
chips.
brilliant. What's that?
Read-only
To be this
memory
really intelligent.
chips.
What's that?
Chips that hold
I
their
could never do
information.
something
You
like
get
that
a ROM
because
chip,
what's
all
that?
the
It just seems like
components
it's
and
really
chips,
difficult. What's that?
chip
It just seems like it's
manuals.
very
The chips
difficult
I
to
was
what's that?
interested in.
Very difficult
The
to
fact
do
that
this
this
because
chip was
what's
so
that?
easy to get.
I
Of
can't.
what the Motorola chip
What's
would have
that?
cost me. Chuck Peddle was
Chuck
peddling
Peddle? Who the
the
fuck
chip.
is that? What's that?
Put which chip?
Don't make
so
no- what's
that
that?
wire
It don't make
between
no
chips
sense.
would
What's
be
that?
short. The
Who the fuck
majority
is
of
Chuck
my
Peddle?
chips
What's
was
that?
RAM chips
Cocksucker.
on
What's
it,
that?
and two
Don't make no
interface
sense.
adapter
Fucking- wait,
chips.
what's that?
I used
Cocksucker,
sockets
Chuck
for all
Peddle.
my
I
chips
fucking- what's
because
that?
I was
I hate his
where the
fucking
soldered
guts.
chips that went
What's
bad
that? Don't mean
easily
nothing to me,
removed
Chuck
bad
Peddle.
chips
Fuck you. What's
with
that?
a couple of PROM chips.
Cocksucker. What's that?
These
Don't
programmable
mean
read-only
nothing.
memory
Fuck you.
chips.
What's
Two
that?
of these PROM chips that
What's
were
that?
available. These chips would
What's
hold
that?
my monitor program.
How
and
long
some
is this
PROM
tape? It's
chips.
fucking good.
Both
This guy's
programs
really
into the
smart.
chip.
What's that?
I borrowed 32 SRAM chips
What's that?
with these chips inside
That's
their
what?
sockets with all the chips
What's
in
that?
place to burn the program into
I can't
the
listen
chip.
to this.
I
What's that?
studied the chip's data sheets. Here was a computer with 30 chips on it, having
that?
so few chips.
What's
It was
that?
like the same amount of chips on an
What's that?
Altair. We're talking about a new memory chip,
What's
which would
that?
have 4K bits per chip. The first time silicon chip memory
that?
would only take 8 chips
What's that?
instead of the 32 SRAM chips with as few
that?
chips as possible.
that?
I had selection chips, vertical counter chips of the 2 of these selection chips, and maybe another chip or 2 worth of logic. Get a DRAM chip. 4K bit DRAM chips for sale at a reasonable price. But he got me Intel DRAM chips. I had to add a couple more chips to my computer, but the Intel chips were physically so much smaller than the AMI chips. A smaller sized chip with fewest chips. I was trying to get chips for a computer I'd designed. If I used chips by Synergetics, the computer had fewer chips than if I used Fairchild chips. Which Synergetics chips I'd use? The Synergetics chips I'd use in the design were much larger than the equivalent Fairchild chips. Not simply fewer chips. From designing for fewer chips, usually fewer chips means fewer connections, but not always. Add a couple of extra chips to go with Intel's chips. Because that chip design eventually became the standard for all memory chips. Solder all
I'm
their
just saying
chips
it
to a
now. I
printed
don't even know
circuit,
whose
and were
quality
getting
it is.
chips
What's
almost
that?
free from their companies
What do
anyway.
you want, Ma?
You did end up finding
Ma,
a
you're not
chip
supposed. What's
distributor,
that? You're not
and he
supposed to
paid
do
us.
that with those
We were able to
darker.
pay for the chips.
Ma, what's that?
Plug chips into sockets for
You
$1
fucking
a
sit down
board.
like that. I
Describe
don't
the
like
chips
this.
on the
Ma, what's
board.
that?
With chips working
What's
at the
that? I feel like I'm
frequencies you would
dreaming
need.
of something.
Just a matter
What's
of
that?
buying more chips.
What's that?
The Apple II would be designed with colorability on those chips. In
what's
doing
that?
this, I knew I would save some chips.
fucking hate
the
this
Apple
book. What's
II
that?
ended up with half as many chips
What's
as the
that?
Apple
Why is he
I.
saying
By
this?
now, I had faster DRAM chips.
What's that?
These new chips
DRAM?
could
What
do
the
it
fuck are
twice
these?
every microsecond.
Oh,
This
God.
little blank board with chips on the top
what's
side
that?
of it. There wasn't a single chip I could
know,
save.
what's
I was
that?
so impressed to meet him after
Please.
the roll. His
me?
chip showed
What's
him how
that?
many chips and how it
chip.
worked
What's
and
that?
everything. That was making a chip that was
What's that?
compatible with. They said that any ROM chips we
ROM,
had
what's that?
around connected to a ROM or PROM chip on the board with just a single PROM chip. The 22 or so chips,
What's that?
about 20 of them weren't needed. I stripped out 20 of their chips. I did this using 2 chips.
What's that?
One chip was a
What's that?
register and one was a PROM.
What's that?
And saving it to the master 8-bit chip register.
What's that?
And put in the exact same chips.
What's that?
And had us add chips
What's that?
you do have inside the chip. That's
what's
because
that?
the chip didn't already have 4-bit microprocessor chip.
What's that?
Transistors on a chip.
What's that?
Memory chips.
What's that?
Wow. So
That was fucking good. Let's hear that again. That's fucking great, this guy.
it's very fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
It really
Yeah.
shows you how the chip changed
that?
the world.
Yeah. The
That's good.
microchip. Oh, wow. Boy, he sure likes saying that.
he sure does.
He loves me.
Just a little section of the book. Steve Wozniak.
Amazing.
What's that?
Oh, poor Chip.
He went to a dark place for a while.
Yeah. He couldn't deal with it. He got chip overload. Yeah.